All right, now let's talk about one factor which will be very important to companies like SKLD, and that's power. So recently we are hearing politics of tariff in the energy sector, the 4 trillion naira debts, which the government have said that they're going to use bonds to repay. You know, that's also another. So joining us to help us understand some of this and perhaps what to expect is a director of West Power and Gas Limited, Mr. George Eto. Mr. Ejomi, good morning and welcome to the program. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Eto. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Eto.
I can't hear you.
Okay, I think there's a technical glitch there somewhere between the communication right here in the studio and Mr. Itomi. I do hope that we can sort that out. But we've heard a lot of times right here the need for cost-reflective tariff. And those who are operating in the energy sector in Nigeria have over time told us that it's one of the bane of development in the energy sector. And even though reforms started in the Nigeria's energy sector long before the current economic reforms in the country, it's been a hurdle stopping a lot of growth and development in that energy sector. And then, of course, the consequences of that is why we have that 4 trillion naira. If you saw the papers yesterday, there were talks of the politics of tariff, because if you don't have the right structure, the tariff structure, then, of course, we'll continue to have debts. And then we may not have, a proper working structure for operators in the energy sector, and that, of course, would affect its movement. Let's see if Mr. Tomi can hear us now. I do hope he can.
Hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yes, I can.
Thank God. I'm happy to hear that. Good morning and welcome to the program.
My pleasure, and compliments of the season.
Yeah, I wish you the same. So, now we are talking about politics of tariff. You've always, when we've had you on the program, insisted that the tariff structure in Nigeria is not sustainable, cannot sustain the sector, and now we're adding politics to it, which is very worrisome. But I think one evidence of the tariff issue is the 4 trillion naira debt, which the government has promised that they're using bonds to pay for. What's the position now from your perspective?
Well, let's understand something. Electricity tariffs are heavily political. And I just need for you to cast your mind back to the inception of this privatization in 2013. One of the things that was agreed when investors were coming in was that there would be cost-reflective tariffs. In other words, you should, in theory, be able to recover the cost for energy through receipts of monies from consumers, less, of course, some of those technical losses that you cannot do much about. That was the understanding. But then, run up into the 2014 election, the government, without warning, instead of going towards the cost-reflective regime, actually did instruct the regulator to drop the tariffs. And that's because tariffs are so heavily political. And they believe if they do that, they will endear themselves to the electorate. But the net effect was that it set the privatization back from the beginning. And from that point on, we've been trying to play catch-up with tariffs. And now, what goes into tariffs? It's the method of calculating it is a multi-year tariff order, which takes into consideration all the factors that go into the cost of energy. That would include the source. In the case of the thermal plants, we're looking at the cost of gas, and then the hydro as well. Then you are looking at the cost of inflation, and then you are looking at all other macro and macroeconomic factors. So the aggregate of that is what gives you a tariff So this tariff is usually set for 5 years. But then every 6 months prior to the 2023 Act, they do what they call a review of the MITO to adjust for inflation. Those are things that happen somewhat regularly. And I can tell you for free that the regulator always had an idea of what the true tariffs were. And what they do is that they give DISCOs the orders to go ahead to implement these tariffs. But they do the calculation, they don't get clearance from government, as it were. So DISCOs are then made to hold those tariffs. Now, you cannot cheat nature, as they say. For as long as you hold the tariffs down, the cost at which you are getting this energy continues to rise, and that's where the subsidy came in. Don't forget the origins of electricity supply in Nigeria. It was generally dealt with like a social service. So trying to adjust from being a social service to now a more commercial product is also creating its own adjustments problem. So we continued with this tariff structure from about 2014 through to about 2020 when COVID hit us. And of course, when COVID hit us, people were not working, so they couldn't generally afford to pay electricity, yet you couldn't cut them off the grid. DISCOs were actually instructed to keep the lights on, and that's when the government started bearing the full brunt of these subsidies. They just couldn't handle it any longer. So post-COVID, they then allowed for the doubling of tariffs. Now, when you double tariffs like that, if a product sold for 100 naira and overnight it becomes 200 naira, it creates what we call a tariff shock amongst consumers. And in Nigeria, when people get shocked by tariffs, unscrupulous people, they just simply bypass their meters. So energy theft cases increased as a result of this sudden jump, which is why it is always important to understand that the tariff methodology introduced in MITO was meant to allow for periodic increases, gives you like time to adjust your finances, reorder your priorities. So this sudden thing has always been a problem. And we did warn at that time that we were simply kicking the can forward and that Nigerians would resist it. Anyway, the tariffs were doubled. We had to grapple with energy theft issues, and that has not left us as I speak. Now, fast forward to 2022. The government still was now reeling, and I'm going to address that 4 trillion gap, because when we started this journey, the gap was in the hundreds of billions. It was in the hundreds of billions. And then we now started having this increase, as I mentioned to you, because the revenues were not coming in from the distribution companies, and it kept going up. It wasn't consequent upon COVID, and then we then had those, in 2023, those removal of subsidies, because part of what this regime then came up with was that before the entire economy collapses, they needed to do what they needed to do, which is why you had all those wide-ranging reforms across the currency, the currency, that's the naira devaluation occurred. Then you needed to take off petroleum subsidy. Subsidy was not just for power alone, it was also for petroleum. Mm-hmm. So the net effect of all this, of course, was that we had hyperinflation. And hyperinflation also meant that cost of goods so many years ago had doubled, quadrupled, as the case would be. And that's no different from electricity. You have to treat electricity like a commodity. All right,
Ms. Aitomi, sorry, I know you're trying to help us understand, but you know how time is on television. So moving forward now, there's this suggestion that obviously it is necessary for the sustenance of the sector, we need to have a cost-reflective tariff structure. CPPE is suggesting partial transition. I wonder what you see as workable for us to transit into this cost-reflective tariff structure?
Let me say we've already started it. That's what your banding system introduced. It's the banding system. There are 5 bands, A to E, and as we talk today, it's only band A that's actually paying full cost reflective tariffs. Bands B, C, and D, and you can tell the difference. The difference between band A and band B is almost four times. And so what the discos try to do is to, as improve services, migrate more and more people from lower bands to higher bands. This is the transition method. And if you look at the figures, overall revenues from discos has increased tremendously. By the first half of this year, we had hit the over 1 trillion mark, which was unheard of in the history of tariff collections. And as I speak to you, towards year end, we're inching towards 2 trillion. That would help, but there's still a lot to be done. And it also gives us an opportunity to review this banding system. I'd rather a system, instead of just identifying a narrow group of consumers and you call them band A, find a way of distributing, spreading this burden of the subsidy across the bands, except perhaps band E, which is the poorest of the poor, and just have people in some proportionate fashion bear this responsibility. If you don't do that, one emerging trend that's occurring now is that many band A customers who are reeling under high tariffs are looking for alternative sources of energy. Many people I know now have solar power and they're slowly going off grid. That in itself could be a big problem if we don't find a way of adjusting for tariffs. Then quickly, renewables. Let's not underplay what renewables can do. With solar energy, mini grids, the mini grid reforms are already out and the regulations are available. So people can begin to have mini grids, especially for rural areas. Because once you get a lot of people out of the grid, because we're discussing grid power here, once you get a lot of people out of the grid, you can then give grid power to, let me say, the productive sector. And I'm happy that today, I think the minister announced that they're going to build a new transmission line, because that's one of the biggest problems we're having, running from the west to the east, which will cater for a lot of commercial consumers along those corridors. So to summarize, it will be a multi-pronged approach to deal with this issue of cost-reflective tariffs, but we should not kill the goose that lays the golden eggs in the form of band A customers. So you don't drive those ones away. You just need to find a way of spreading it across the other bands, because once you do that, liquidity returns to the system. Discos are able to improve on their network. The transmission company is able to give sufficient power, and then we can begin to have inch slowly towards a new power regime.
Thank you so much for that, especially helping us to summarize it there, what you think we should be doing to accelerate the process, the transition process. The Director of West Power and Gas Limited, Mr. George Etomi, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.